Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm Kristen Hammett, and I am so glad you have joined us for today's webinar. It looks like we've got people slowly joining us, so I'll do my introduction and then we'll get underway. As you know, my name is Kristen Hammett. I'm Director of Ministry Services at the Signatory. It is mid-December now, officially less than 2 weeks until Christmas, and I know as ministry leaders and development officers, this is a very busy time of year. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And for those of you who are listening to this in the recorded version after the year end, welcome to you as well. Today's topic of online giving is important to your development plan. As one who did 90% of my Christmas shopping online this year, I can tell you the online experience is here to stay. It is becoming more and more important. While you can't change your online giving platform overnight, there are things you can begin thinking about. Today, we're going to talk about just how you can accelerate your online giving. And I am so pleased to welcome Ray Gary and Ron Werner to our webinar today. Ray is the CEO of iDonate, a company that provides nonprofits with technology solutions to do more good in the world. Ray's experience in launching, building, and helping businesses succeed spans nearly 3 decades, as he has served as the president of venture capital group of Koch Industries. And Ron is vice president of sales and marketing at iDonate. Prior to joining Ray at iDonate, Ron has had a long career in technology, including executive roles at PricewaterhouseCoopers. We are so privileged to have both Ray and Ron with us today. Both are very knowledgeable and have great information to share. Ray will be with us throughout today's presentation, but we may have some time constraints as we get near the end, so we will save answering questions until the end this time. However, you're still welcome to ask questions as you have them. I'll be keeping track of those, and we'll be sure we get you an answer toward the end of the presentation. All right, with that, I will hand this over to Ray and to Ron, and we are excited to learn from you today.
Thank you, Kristen. This is Ray Gary, and as Kristen said, Ron Werner is joining me, and we will do a little bit of a tag team on this. We're having a bit of a technical glitch in terms of slide advancement, so I may do an okay here or there for Ron to advance the slides, but it's a pleasure and an honor to be on this webinar today, and there's just a tremendous amount going on in online giving. As Kristen said, this is a really, really busy time of the year, and we know you guys have a lot going on, but hopefully this is something that will maybe get you thinking about things, be a little provocative, and maybe something you can refer back to later on when you can catch your breath a little bit about after the end of the year. But we wanted to give you a little bit of a few things to think about, and maybe try to encourage you to even maybe try some new things as well. So we'll just jump right in. We'll be respectful of your time and move through this. I always like to start off by giving people context. A lot of people don't really follow the numbers and stats like sort of nerds like me do, but our industry in terms of giving, according to Giving USA, is about a $400 billion industry. And of that $400 billion, about $286 billion is given, from individuals. The balance would be from corporations and foundations and things. But I'd always kind of like to start there because people may not have kind of the perspective about the size of the industry. And before Ron goes on, of that, well, go ahead, Ron. Of that $400 billion we're talking about that represents about 2% of personal disposable income. It happens to represent about 2% of GDP too. And when we kind of started iDonate, this was one of the things that sort of jumped off the page to us, which is, wow, we're in a 300 plus $400 billion industry, but we're a whopping 2% givers, and that really bothered me. What bothered me more is as I began to look at the data, which you see depicted here, we weren't just 2% givers; we've been 2% givers for decades. And on top of that, if you think about it in terms of wealth, which we'll talk a little bit more in the webinar in a few minutes, according to the latest stat, U.S. household wealth is about 90 trillion or so. So if you juxtapose our giving against our wealth, not just our income, we're a whopping 0.5% givers. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity. The other thing I looked at, because we're really keen on working with faith-based organizations, because that's kind of who we are and our DNA and a lot about our life experience. This was something that I think is important, but at the same time pretty troubling. And there's a lot of reasons driving this, but you can see here for some of the major categories, what was in the late 70s and 80s, almost 50% of all that giving was done through faith-based organizations. It's now about 33%. You would see the same kind of map when you actually look at churches as well. And so it's going in the wrong direction. And that was you can skip through that one, Ron. That was, I'm sorry, Ron, go back for a second. So that was kind of the point of this slide is, keep in mind that wealth and income are two different things. We'll talk about that in a second, but that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through this presentation. Okay. So when we think about this, we kind of go back and why have we been stuck at 2%? You looked at those numbers and you saw that all the way back to the 70s there. And when we came out of the post-war into the age of enlightenment, or the golden age, if you want to call it, there was a number of things going on here. And since that period of time, if you look at something like GDP, it's and you can just kind of click through these, Ron, if you want to. GDP has grown since that time. You look at the next one, U.S. household net worth has grown rapidly through that time. You look at the average square foot of a home. I always find this interesting because, we've moved from 1,500 over 2,600. The people that have college degrees has risen quite a bit. And you just kind of say, what are the drivers behind this? I mean, technology clearly is one of those drivers behind this. But go ahead, Ron. But if we kind of stop here for a second, why hasn't that impacted the 2%? Why with all this progress, no matter how you look at it or measure it, and with all the technology, why are we still 2% givers? And, certainly why we give hasn't changed, but I would argue that how we give has certainly changed. So is it the tax code? I mean, certainly, there's macro factors out there, and then certainly the tax code impacts how people give when deduction amounts and limitations change. I'm not sure that is. Are we hardwired for some reason to give 2%? I don't know. Are there enough nonprofits out there? It's amazing, but the number of nonprofits is now, almost 1.5 million, and it's doubled in the last decade. And before Ron leaves that slide, if you go back, Ron, it's not just the number of nonprofits, but it's the number of asks, because every nonprofit has a number of projects and a number of asks. And so there's millions and millions of opportunities to give. And I think GoFundMe's even proven that, with what they do in the marketplace. So a lot of this has to do with sort of innovation. Now, when we talk about innovation and think about it for a second, why hasn't innovation really impacted this 2% issue? And so we get to this idea of this chasm. And I kind of want to pick up on what Kristen said a minute ago. And when she referenced her online shopping, I think that's exactly the point. Today's donor is really an empowered consumer. And so when Kristen goes online and uses Amazon or whatever she decides to buy with, she has this expectation that her experience is going to be very personal. It's going to be empowering. For example, she may buy an item. They may recommend items to go with that. They may recommend items based upon her past purchases. If later she gets tired or exhausted and decides to order a pizza, she orders it from her pizza place. They know what kind of pizza that she bought last time. They know her name. She decides to watch a movie at the end of the day because she's exhausted Christmas shopping. Even Netflix recommends things for her. And, and then she's got to go on the road tomorrow and get a flight somewhere. And she gets her phone out and picks Uber. And with a few clicks, she's at the airport and she gets a receipt and a survey. And so we've been conditioned as donors to expect these kinds of very personal and very empowering experiences. As I like to say all the time, I've got college kids and they always run out of money for some reason. And even at a traffic light, my wife will Venmo them money. Yet on the other side of the chasm, we have the nonprofit. And unfortunately, we spend a lot of our time really fundraising and in some cases just trying to survive and trying to do the work that really matters. And it's really difficult for nonprofits to be able to provide the kinds of experiences that Silicon Valley has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into, that donors now expect when they go online. And so it's created this chasm that, man, I expect this, but my nonprofit doesn't even know who I am. They don't even know my name. When I get a letter, it's Raymond, not Ray. And when I go to give online, it's hard. I mean, I could go buy something on Amazon, I can order a pizza, I can watch a movie, and half the time it takes to give. They don't connect with me in all the forms of giving in the way that I like to give. They don't allow me to log back in and manage my account and see my payment history or change my payment terms. And I can go on and on and on and on. And if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. I'm not, for those that are on the call here today, it may not apply at all, but that's what we see in the marketplace, is this massive chasm. And so let's just kind of jump into it from an online giving perspective and what we're talking about today. If Ron will go ahead. I think the first question you've got to really ask yourself is, how well do you really know your donors? I mean, they sit in a database. Some of them, obviously the ones that give big gifts, you take them to lunch or dinner and they get a lot of attention, but how well do you know them, and how well do you connect with them when you connect with them in online ways, whether it be through a MailChimp campaign or whether it be through a peer-to-peer or text to give invitation? Are you speaking to them not only personal, but are you speaking to them about what they care about? Or are you just sending them the generic blast? And so some of these tools and some of the time that it takes to segment list and things can be complicated and can be expensive. But even for small nonprofits or small organizations, just taking the time to really understand what project somebody gave to or what designated fund they gave to and begin to learn what they really care about makes a material difference. I'll give you an example that you can really connect to. 72% of people don't ever even give a second gift. And without getting that second gift and being able to convert people into a multi-year donor, you really don't have a good chance to keep those donors active over time. So you don't have to spend a ton of money. You don't have to be very sophisticated, but you have to find ways to connect with people and personalize the communications to things that they really care about. Ron, you can go ahead. So this is just sort of some personas to kind of maybe connect to, but yesterday's donor, not today's, but yesterday's donor was really a contented benefactor. And this is sort of the profile from all the research and data out there. They're highly satisfied with their giving. They're very loyal to one or two nonprofits or so, and they really have no intention of switching. If you contrast that to today's donor, which is on the next slide, these are sort of the top three personas that the research shows. It's a very different persona. They may be unaware of opportunities. They're very strapped for time. They have a very high expectation that things are convenient. The last thing they want to do is go to your website or go to a form of giving, and it takes a lot of time. And the other persona, for example, the busy idealist, they want to be the first to discover a cause. They're folks like that. I mean, think Ice Bucket Challenge or something like that. The cautious driver, heavily influenced by their social circle. And so this gets into, why do things like social media? It's not just so you can be on social media, but it's because your donor is impacted by their social circle, and your donor is most likely to make decisions based upon what their circle does. And so there's this big contrast. Now, what the research shows, and this is research from a study that was founded by the Gates Foundation and several other prominent foundations that did this work, is that industry-wide, if we spoke to today's donor in the way that they expect to be spoken to, and we engaged with them in the way they expect to be engaged, there's an additional $36 billion of untapped potential for giving on top of what's already given that's not being fulfilled just because we don't really connect well. So the point of the next slide is simply, we've got to find ways to connect with the donor. And in summary for this section, doing this in a simple, convenient, and personal way. And again, I want to emphasize, this doesn't mean you have to go out and spend a ton of money on technology. I work with a couple of nonprofits personally that I'm on the board of, and their budgets are $200,000 or $300,000 as an example. I'm on a Young Life board. I'm on a K-Life board, and we do things almost manually in some cases. We will. I'll give you a great example. There's a massive amount of research that shows follow-up statistics. If people get thank you'd or followed up in the first 24 hours, the likelihood of them getting a second gift goes up exponentially. And so just being able to assign a volunteer or assign someone to do nothing but simple blocking and tackling, no sophisticated systems, no complexity, just follow up and do the thank you well. 73% of nonprofits don't even offer a welcome series. So when somebody gives, there's no follow-up in an automated fashion to welcome them into the organization. So a lot of times, and I'm a technologist and I spent my whole life in it and I care about technology, but a lot of times we get caught up in that and we miss the basics. So don't forget just to assign some of these tasks out to volunteers and have them do, the basics, whether you're automated or not. From a simple standpoint, convenience standpoint, if you go back around for a second, whatever technology or whatever tools you use, just make sure that they're easy for people. Make sure that they don't have friction. Make sure that people don't have to click, 14 or 15 ways. Make sure that the donate button is prominently displayed on the website on the first page. I can't tell you, there's study after study after study, and we have this data about, where you place the donate button and making it prominent. I mean, I can't tell you how many websites we go on to, and I'm a fairly sophisticated technologist, and I do this for a living. I've taken 3 or 4 minutes sometimes to even find out how to give to an organization. Well, put a donate button in the upper right-hand corner, change the color of it, make it prominent, and make it obvious. Those things sound trite, but they're just not executed well. So there's a number of things like that we could get into more detail on, but just kind of don't forget the basics. The last part, is closing the loop. And this is so important today. And this gets into a whole nother webinar that we could spend an hour on in and of itself. But, one of the biggest challenges, and I was with 5 donors this morning talking about this, one of the biggest challenges, particularly with the millennial generation, and particularly with this demographic that we live in today, is that they like to see the loop closed. They're not institutional givers. They're not like my father and my grandfather, where they'll write a blank check to an institution. And so giving has been decoupled, and they have an expectation that in my 28-year-old daughter, my 24-year-old daughter, they're very generous, and they'll give to sponsor a child. They'll give to, that water well or whatever it is they have a passion for, because they can see the outcome of that. But the idea of them writing a blank check to an institution, the bad news for you guys on the phone is they struggle to do that. And so you're going to have to find ways to really connect and put handles on the specific things that people care about, because this generation thinks that way. They don't think about writing a blank check to your institution because they're very cynical and they're just not wired that way. Let's move to kind of the second section. So that's the donor side. The second section is the org side, which is you. A lot of investment and a lot of emphasis is made on donor management systems, CRM systems. I'm sure you have one. If you don't, you'll probably get one someday, but it doesn't really matter what system that is, whether it's your Salesforce or your Blackbot or whatever it is you buy. Unfortunately, those systems are important and you need one, and they're really, really good at storing information, but unfortunately they weren't built for online fundraising or donor engagement. So we spend a lot of money and we spend a lot of time on those systems, but they weren't built for the purposes of connecting to today's donor. This isn't a sales presentation, but the reason iDonate exists is because we sit between that CRM and system and the donor, and we turn that CRM and system into a fundraising system. So whatever tools you use or whatever technologies you evaluate, you want to evaluate them in the context of how they can turn that file cabinet, if you will, into a fundraising solution. The next slide I emphasize a lot. you need to be careful of stitching together lots of disparate tools, using unified platforms where you have 5 or 6 different opportunities to give in one platform, like we have at iDonate as an example. Our customers find to be a huge benefit for the simple reason that they're not having to manage data in silos. And so, lots of times you have different data files, you have different merchant accounts because somebody wants, your peer-to-peer system to have well, thanks, Ron. I forgot I had the slide in here. This is a great example of that. You may go out and get a web page. You may go out and get a crowdfunding page. You may go out and do some campaign landing pages. You may do text to give. You may have event giving. You may have corporate matching systems, whatever the case may be. The first thing you'll see up there is you'll have a different user experience for your donors because every tool is different from a UX standpoint in terms of how your donors engage. For example, on your website, you might not ask for, key information to set up an account. But on your peer-to-peer system that you got from somebody else, they may ask for different types of data. And so your donor's going, well, I'm dealing with the same organization, but the requirements are different on the front end. The experience is different. When Kristen goes to Amazon and she buys, some clothes, and then she goes over and maybe buys a kitchen appliance for another friend, she has the same checkout experience in Amazon no matter what she's engaging in. And so that's a big issue. The second thing, if Ron will click the button, is you have different data files that you have to manage. You have different merchant accounts because if you go get different tools, they'll use a different merchant account. Somebody somewhere in the organization is trying to reconcile all those and put all that data together. And then of course you've got different training issues as well because as I said, you got to stitch that together. Go ahead, click Ron, and you have different training issues because you're using different tools. So that's something to really think about from an organization standpoint when you think about these digital tools. Is don't create an environment where you've got a mess on the back end and you've got a lot of data silos and you got a lot of data files to manage, because you're never going to see a holistic view of the donor and you're never going to be able to deliver those personalized experiences because you don't really know how people are interacting with you across your organization. So what's the new mindset? The new mindset as an organization is 4 points. And I took this from this Gates study that we did, and I think it's right on point. You've got to embrace this new culture of giving. Things have to be dynamic. The giving shouldn't be a chore. You've got to be connected. You've got to meet people where they are. They're not just sitting around waiting for you to send them an email. You've got to connect with them in the networks where they live, whether that's through social or however that is. Things have got to be simple. They've got to be unbelievably convenient and simple. And the last one I like a lot is even joyful, whether that's the message that reinforces why they give and the impact that I talked about closing the loop, or that's just kind of maybe it's fun. I still get a kick out of using Uber because I like watching the little car pull up and kind of see the experience. So this new culture of giving is important, and go ahead, Ron. And it's all geared around the idea that the donor is centric and the donor is king. Now, don't anybody on the webinar get mad at me, but I see too many nonprofits that are very donor centric. When is it convenient for me to do an email? When is it convenient for us to do an event? When is it convenient for us to communicate to our donors? That's normal, but that's not how your donors connect. So to go back to Kristen's example, when she's on Amazon, Amazon's not running a sale on electronics on March 17th because that's when they want to run it. They're prompting her whenever she's in there buying something else because they know what she bought and they know that she may want the companion product to it. Now, whether or not we get that sophisticated or not, that's not the point. But it's not about you. It's about the donor and being focused on the donor and making them centric. So how do we do all this? So let's just kind of talk through this quickly. First thing is you've got to have technology that's built around engagement, not just storing things in a file cabinet. The second thing is you have to have a marketing mindset. There's a whole lot in there, but you have to think like a marketer. That means you have to test your things. You have to test messages. You may want to do some A/B testing. You may want to See what your conversion rate looks like when you try different messages. Again, you may want to think about segmenting lists and sending people things that they connect to versus just mass email blast. And then the third, I think, that really speaks to the signatory and what they're all about is we really need to tap into this idea of wealth giving to really unlock the 2%. And that's got to be part of the equation too. It's not going to be solved just from income giving. So driving innovation, but also at the same time, I don't care how much technology you have, if you don't sort of drive the transformation and the mindset change in the organization, you just have a bunch of cool technology. So anyway, I think that's what that next slide says. No matter what tools you use, whether it be P2P or online text events, whatever it is, they've got to be donor-centric and user-friendly. And this isn't a sales call. I'm just telling you, whatever you go look at, make sure that that's first and foremost. So let's get a real-life example. So a real-life example is a donor visits your site. We're following the interest of what they give in. This is how an Amazon does it to Kristen. They follow where she clicks. They know what she's interested in. And in this example, when Tim gets ready to give, it actually knows who he is because he's logged in with his user account. It thanks him for his past donations on the giving form, and it renders a giving form that's appropriate based upon what he cares about. You don't see it on this slide, but the messaging would be personal based upon what he cares about. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing at iDonate. That's where this industry is heading. I'm going to know who you are when you visit me, and I'm going to render a personalized giving experience that connects to you. I'm not going to put a gift array that starts at $50 in there for a high net worth donor that's visiting the site. So those are just kind of examples of that. From an engagement standpoint, consider looking at platforms that are stitched together, where you're not required to go do all that and build that for yourself, because you need to be in the business of your mission, not being a systems integrator that stitches things together and makes it happen. So consider platforms that are built around engagement where things are already built together. And the focus should be on the next slide is this should all be about driving retention, the number of gifts and the retention of the donor, and driving towards that second gift and that multi-year giver. A couple other things here, and I apologize because I kind of bounced around. I had a couple of these things out of order a little bit, but as I said, think like a marketer on this. And if you go to the next slide, Ron, and this is kind of provocative because it's a little counter to what the guide stars of the world and the people like that say. They rate you and they give you the gold stars and things like that for not having a lot of fundraising expense and having all your expense in program expense. That's convenient because that's easy to follow and simple, but that's not transformative. And some of the really progressive and sophisticated organizations are really not paying attention to that. They're going, I know I need to invest in technology and in techniques and strategies because that's the way the donor thinks today. And if my fundraising expense gets up there, then so be it. But I'm not going to be able to do it without investing in it. Let's see, I don't want to be redundant here, Ron. So maybe let's kind of skip to the statistic there about the 6X, if you don't mind. Just kind of some numbers to kind of connect to. If the email is personalized, here's a number to get your head around. There's a 6 times increase in transaction rates just by personalizing that email. It's been proven over and over and over again. That's why it's so important. On the next slide, 74% of consumers are frustrated when their website content is not personalized. I'm with a gentleman today that gives to a major faith-based organization, and he gets a letter, he gets 20 emails. They're not personalized. They don't even really know his name. He gives a lot to the organization, and there's just a real high frustration rate that, you mean I've given to you for 20 years and you still don't really know me? And so that's a very, very high frustration. So The next slide is, to do that and to do that well. And some of these things that I'm talking about today are their own webinar. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But you really have to embrace this idea of giving automation. You have to embrace this idea that I'm going to invest in the kind of automation it takes to engage my donor and take them on a journey with me. So if a donor comes in and they give to a project based in Uganda, I know that that's what they care about, and I need to take them on a donor journey through a series of emails or letters or interactions along the line of engaging them in what they care about. What we do as nonprofits is we find somebody that gives and we just blast them on the same stuff every time, and none of it's connected to what they're really engaged about. So you'll have to make an investment, and whether this is technology or whether it's a couple of volunteers that sit there and find this out and do that manually, it doesn't really matter. Without being able to do it, you're not going to drive that engagement ultimately that you need to drive in your organization. So next point, kind of wrapping up this section. In addition to all this personalized stuff that I've talked about, the message around empowerment is equally as important. And what I mean by that is we're used to being able to take our phone out and log it into our bank account and seeing what our bank is. We're used to being able to take our phone out and move money. We're used to being able to log into our Amazon account and see our recent purchases. We may want to change our credit card. We may want to change the payment schedule. We're used to having this expectation of being empowered. And when donors can't have control today, it's very frustrating to them. And so if you don't have the technology that provides them that empowerment, just know that your donors will be frustrated, and they'll go if you don't engage well, to other places to give that connect better. So empowerment is something that's extremely important. Last section, kind of about 3 or 4 more minutes, and we'll kind of wrap up and try to maybe take a few questions if you guys have any. The last part I put in there because I think it's so important, which is this idea of wealth giving. There's about $35 to $40 billion given in non-cash every single year, and it changes based upon the stock market because about 30% of this is stock related, and it represents an enormous place for another way to engage with the donor in a personal way about their stuff or their assets. If Ron goes to the next slide, I mentioned this in the opening, our wealth is 90 trillion. Our U.S. household wealth is 90 trillion. And I think the folks at the Signature will tell you they probably have more current numbers than I do, but over $30 trillion of that's going to be transferred over the next couple of decades as there's this wealth transfer from generation to generation. I think that's on the next, 90 trillion, I'm sorry, is going to be transferred the next couple of decades. And so being in a position as an organization to capture a percentage of that wealth is going to be extremely important. And that wealth, will come in all forms, not just cash, but in assets. I'll leave you with this kind of example here. As at UCLA had a number of anthropologists that lived with a series of families, 32 families over 7 years. They didn't physically live with them, but they studied them, and then built a coffee table book called Life at Home in the 21st Century. And they found a number of amazing things. And I like leaving you with this because it's something that kind of is very provocative and makes you walk away and think, is that in the U.S. we have 3% of the world's kids, but I think the next slide, Ron, but 3% of the world's kids, but we buy 40% of the world's toys. 75% of Americans can't even use their own garage. And, self-storage, and if you'll hold here for a second, Ron, is still one of the fastest growing commercial real estate segments in the country. And we spend $27 billion on self-storage. And 1 in 10 Americans, I think on the next slide, actually have a self-storage unit. And that wasn't true in previous generations, and it's not true outside the U.S. So we're sort of, if you took it all and you stacked it all up, it would be 3 Manhattans of self-storage. It was really interesting when I studied this space. It took 25 years to get 1 billion square feet under roof and less than 8 years to double it. So we're this nation, there's kind of a Luke 12 message here. There's this nation of consumerism and stuff. And so there's also an opportunity, as you're thinking about, digital giving and online giving, there are ways today to connect with donors to even now unlock this giving. We process automobiles, we process jewelry, we process boats, we process grain, we even process stock. We have tons of stock gifts coming in through our system right now. So we often think of credit, debit, ACH, PayPal, or whatever, but there's also a potential to start engaging with donors about wealth as opposed to income giving. So always kind of leave that at the end so that you don't forget about it. But in summary, connecting in a personal way, investing in systems that are built around engagement, that provide that personal connectivity and that empowered connectivity, and really being able to understand who today's donor is so that I could focus on them and make them centric is what we're really finding key today. And that's where we're seeing the investments from organizations go, is into these engagement systems, into these giving automation systems that allow us to connect in these much more personal ways. So make sure your tools are simple, make sure they're convenient, make sure your messaging is tight and simple. And as I said many times throughout this presentation, don't stress or have anxiety if you don't have it all figured out, because you can do a lot of this manually, and don't neglect the basics of blocking and tackling when you think about sort of online giving. So I kind of want to stop there. A lot of information, but it's a real pleasure and honor to be able to speak about this. I think we'll take some questions, and maybe Kristen will moderate that. Is that where we go next, Kristen?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Ray. That was great information. I think that no matter what size the ministry that is tuned in, they can gain something from that. If you're sitting, if there's a ministry that's been listening and they are in that stitched together kind of phase where they've got maybe a couple different silos or 3 different silos of how they're engaging donors, and you're right, the back end is kind of a mess and they're not talking to each other, is there a initial step that you would recommend for those ministries or those nonprofits to take in kind of streamlining that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, depending upon to what extent they've engaged their donor management system and to what extent those silos are flowing in. I know that in the couple of the small organizations that I'm in, we don't even rely on the donor management system. We'll actually just do it the old-fashioned way, which is to import things into an Excel file, so we can at least see that Kristen interacted with us in a couple of places. Oh, she gave a text to give at this event. She gave online through our website, and we began to understand sort of how she may be interacting with our ministry and what things she cares about. But if you have a good CRM system and you have the data all flow into it well, hopefully you can see the different interactions. All too often, and I don't want to get too nerdy here, all too often it'll just show up as a dollar figure in the back office, and you really won't know, the designated fund or the project or the channel they used. So sometimes you just have to break it down if your CRM system or your CRM integration is not built that way, and catch it on the front end. That's a great question.
Yep. So we have another question that just came across. What if we are on the other end? Not much infrastructure in place, but plan to grow in the coming years. What types of things should we be looking for in vendors or back-end structure to build something seamless instead of stitching it together like you're discussing?
Well, you'll get a selfish answer, but whether it doesn't really matter whether it's I donate or not. I think you have to look at the category of that I donate plays in, which is the platforms that are stitched together. When I came into this, it was a personal thing. I mean, I came out of the technology industry. So did Ron. We're very comfortable with technology. But when I started looking at these organizations and looking at the work they were doing on the back end, I thought, oh my gosh, how can they go focus on their mission? And so we're seeing more and more people embrace these unified platforms that not just provide everything in one place, but I just want to drive this home. They give their donor the same experience from channel to channel. It's unbelievable. You can go give online and then you show up, then maybe the organization sends you out an opportunity to do peer-to-peer giving, and it's a completely different experience with how you sign up and register. And by the way, I don't have a user account. I can go on iTunes and I can buy a song, and I can go buy a video, and I can go buy a book, and it's the same user account.
Yep.
Well, if it's stitched together, your donors, think about it. They could have 3 or 4 user accounts. That makes them pull their hair out. And it makes you, who's managing this in the back office, pull all your hair out. So unified platforms are becoming more and more popular for this reason. It's quite frankly very selfish. One of the reasons we're really doing well at iDonate is because people appreciate that value proposition.
Yep. Well, and don't you think it's a wise investment? In this case, this ministry is kind of on the front end. This is a really great infrastructure to put in place, regardless, just as seamless as you can make it. And though, to your point in your presentation about that line item for fundraising may be a little higher than some would prefer, it's really an investment in your infrastructure going forward. And as your organization grows, that will level out a little bit more.
That's exactly right. It'll normalize, but there are cycles where you'll have to make investments, but you're exactly right.
Yep, very good. All right. I don't know. I'll leave it open here for just a couple more minutes. What I really appreciate, Ray, that you shared, and hopefully this will be an encouragement to those that might be smaller in size on the call, is there is definitely an advantage, I think, to streamlining this with technology. But the secret sauce is still donor engagement. Whether you're doing that electronically or you've got a couple of volunteers devoted to that in your development office, helping to mine that data personally, you need to engage your donor, get to know them, get to know what they like, what is it that they like to give to, and then you can engage them further beyond that point.
Well, that's exactly right, Kristen. I won't put everybody to sleep with features, but I'll just tell you one simple feature that's extremely popular in our system that you wouldn't think it's a big deal. Well, we have the ability for you at the charity or the nonprofit or ministry to go put in the emails of the people that are notified when the gift comes in. Well, that's kind of cool, but it's not if you don't use it. And the people that use it, that are notified, that follow up immediately with somebody, whether it's a phone call if the gift warrants, whether it's a quick thank you note with 3 sentences, or whether it's just an email, you'd be shocked at what that does to engagement when you follow up in a timely way. The statistics are overwhelming of what that does. And again, even if it's volunteers, if you just do that one thing well, that's a great first step to better donor engagement.
That's right. And they've heard that before. Our ministry friends have heard that before from
good. Great.
That's a critical message that we certainly want to stand behind, is engage those donors, care for them, thank them. Follow up is so critical. So
that's great.
Thank you both, Ray and Ron. Ron, it turns out I guess you were mostly just advancing slides, but I
was a slide boy today. That's just fine.
He was a backup. He was a backup in case I got in trouble. But thank you so much for this opportunity. We really appreciate being included, and Merry Christmas to all.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you
Ron,
so much for the time
or Ray, if you need to jump off, go right ahead. I'm going to close up with a couple of announcements, but thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
For those of you who represent smaller ministries, I hope you're encouraged today that you can take some of this information and just see which pieces apply to you. What is one step that you can put into practice? And for those of you that represent larger ministries or ministries that are in this beginning framework time of getting to build some infrastructure, I really encourage you to take to heart some of what Ray shared today and see how you can incorporate that into the platform that you choose. Our goal at the Signatory Ministry Services is always to equip you in your development efforts and partner with you with your major donors. As you look into 2019, I ask that you would circle January 16th on your calendar at 12 o'clock Central Time. We will be engaging in a webinar about CEOs and their role as our chief development officers, oftentimes. in our ministries and nonprofits. So mark your calendars today, invite your CEO or your president, perhaps your board chair. I think it'll be a really valuable time for you to take a look at development with the CEO as the chief fundraiser. Curtis Hale, who has had a wide array of background in ministry work and has led I Am Second, will be sharing his insight. You do not want to miss this opportunity. So save the date, January 16th at noon Central Time. I want you to know that we at the Signatory really do appreciate you. You are the workers who are faithfully completing the work to spread the gospel, serve others, and make your communities a better place. We are so thankful for the opportunity to partner with you and to grow generosity and expand the kingdom. So for now, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2019. Thank you so much.